Vietnam, March 1992. It has been only 3 years since the country opened its doors to the non-communist world. A true revolution in a country which has been for so long at war and which is at last attempting to solve its problems after 15 years of isolation. Between 1975 and 1989, few foreigners except the Soviets had set foot on Vietnamese soil. The result is a country out of step with time, one of the world's poorest and one without almost any industrial, energetic or road transport substructures. Thus, the Vietnamese recycle and salvage everything. Here, there's no waste. They don't expect anything more from communism except that it give way to free enterprise, which will allow them to attain the level of their flourishing Thailand neighbors, whom they secretly envy. Here, in Ho Chi Minh City, thousands of Vietnamese people ride their bicycles every Sunday night. Without any particular destination, they spend their evening going around in circles in an aimless fashion, looking for new motivations, new goals. From the medical point of view, the situation isn't any better. The majority of hospitals are dilapidated, under-equipped, and rarely dispose of running water, electricity, or the telephone. The staff is unmotivated, weakly trained, and underpaid. A qualified doctor earns only $6 a month. It is in such a context that the French medical organization, Médecins, Sans frontières, Doctors Without Frontiers, opened a mission in Vietnam in 1990. But to do what exactly? And first of all, who are these so-called French doctors? What are they doing working in a mission on the other side of the world? Away for a year or for a month, all of them are volunteers. They do receive, however, a monthly indemnity of $800 for a beginner and $1,000 after 18 months' experience. There are nevertheless many of them who have made the choice of leaving everything to fulfill a mission of a humanitarian nature, of course. A journey to the heart of Vietnam with Nadia, who is on a one-year mission in Hue, to discover these uncommon doctors.
A mission is the fulfillment of a job that has been entrusted to you. It can be very different from one country to another and from one situation to another. Here my mission is to impart knowledge to other people, to the Vietnamese, who in other areas are already managing their own health system. Another example of an MSF mission may be, for instance, to take on the healthcare in a refugee camp, which means carrying out the medical tasks oneself and running a service, which is really what I consider curative work. The approach is completely different and perhaps easier for a doctor because we really feel that we are achieving something, that we are doing something worthwhile.
Before being assigned to Vietnam, Nadia had already been on 2 other missions, a one-year mission in Guinea, and right after that, an emergency mission to help the Kurds who had sought refuge in the Iranian mountains.
When I came back from Iran, I said I wanted to go away again after a few months, but I would rather go to Asia, and I would rather go for 6 months. I knew what I wanted and I was determined. I wasn't exactly new to the MSF, so I insisted, and when I saw that Asia might slip through my fingers, then I really insisted. A week later they called me back to propose Vietnam for 1 year. I was so happy to be leaving for Vietnam that the length of the mission was almost irrelevant. In any case, it was the kind of mission I liked, as I prefer long-term missions. I did an emergency mission in Iran, lasting 3.5 weeks, just before leaving for Vietnam, and that really made up my mind about long-term missions, where you can take your time, where there's no rush, rather than the emergency missions where you are always in a hurry to get everything done, and if something goes wrong at the start, it's very hard to put it right. This mission is situated in the centre of Vietnam, in the city of Hue. In fact, we live in Hue, but the project takes place in another district, about 40 kilometres south of the city. This city is one of the poorest of the central province, which is itself one of Vietnam's poorest areas. This province has been very isolated since 1975, and since then very few foreigners have come here, which is why we chose it for our programme in 1990.
From 1802 to 1945, Hue was the country's political capital. The 13 emperors of the Nguyen dynasty who reigned during that period gave it the splendid royal tombs, several notable pagodas, and above all the citadel. Built upon the same patterns as those of the Chinese imperial palaces, the citadel was to a large extent destroyed during the 1968 Tet Offensive, which opposed the Americans to the Viet Minh. Today, the quietness of its 200,000 inhabitants confers a very particular provincial spell to Hue.
There are very few of us here in Vietnam because the Vietnamese authorities don't allow many foreigners to work permanently in the country. Our team is small and the project is quite crazy, as we have to look after the whole district, which means 2 hospitals and 22 first aid posts. That's quite a lot for one person, or even 2. So we've decided with the other doctor to focus on the main hospital. So since I've been here, I've been working in one hospital, and very soon I should take over the second one in the mountains.
This is an enormous task, one full of difficulties. Here, one must take into account the susceptibility of the Vietnamese doctors who don't all really appreciate Westerners who seem to know everything. It is necessary to compromise with the authorities who are frequently perplexed and mistrustful. To help Nadia the doctor and Agnes the nurse in this daily diplomatic exercise, each one works permanently with a Vietnamese interpreter who knows better than they how to come to terms with his compatriots. He will cleverly give an opinion or clear up a misunderstanding. One golden rule here, like everywhere in Asia, is to avoid at all costs the person to whom you're speaking lose face.
Frankly, I don't think that the authorities understand what we are doing. They can't imagine, even for a second, that we can do something concrete, other than filing papers or waffling on. There was undoubtedly a time at the beginning when they were happy to have us here, to give them money and equipment, because this is something they can touch. These are things they can see. It has a value in dollars, and this makes them dream. But when the time came to change old habits, I don't think they could imagine what that might mean. They couldn't imagine me spending hours and hours at the hospital, in the different services, meeting the patients, discussing with the doctors. They couldn't imagine that it could take that form. Right now I'm doing some training. I'm preparing the lectures with Vietnamese doctors. I don't think they have the slightest idea of what this means.
L'OMS recommande maximum 3 médicaments à la fois. Et le 10 médicaments.
Here in Vietnam, medical training takes 6 years. The level is very mediocre. It's not completely useless, but it has a lot of gaps. When Vietnamese doctors are sent out to practice in the hospitals, they have no documentation, so they invent their own medicine. They forget their training, and so they make up whatever suits them, whatever will earn them more money. So for me, I felt as soon as I arrived here that it was essential, because the prescriptions are completely crazy. Anything goes. It might be prescribing the wrong dosage of antibiotics, or treating for a high blood pressure problem and stopping it after only 5 days. As I said, they invent new treatments, telling me in Vietnam it's different. So when I teach them, I bring the documents to tell them. In Vietnam, it's like anywhere else. A Vietnamese person is made like a Frenchman or an American. So studies carried out abroad are equally valid in Vietnam.
C'est pas un adrénergique. La bêta moins. Non, c'est un bêta moins.
Of course it's not enough. It's not because I have given them documentation that all the prescriptions will miraculously be right overnight. There's also the basic work at the hospital, which means visiting the departments, looking at the files, checking the prescriptions, and saying every time I don't agree with the doctor, "This is why I don't agree with you, but now you tell me why you chose this treatment." And then we can review the problem together.
Il a 37 ans maintenant, donc peut-être que si là... C'est 17, ici non, mais si avec la fièvre...
Among the Vietnamese doctors I work with, there are a few of them who are impossible to communicate with. They are so blinkered. When I ask them questions, they answer by referring to the hospital's internal regulations. But the problem has nothing to do with internal regulations. It's a real medical problem. So it's very difficult with some people. But I do believe I have really succeeded in making contact with several doctors, young Vietnamese doctors, who are gradually coming out of their shell and who are interested in what I can bring to them, in what I represent. I represent the outside. I represent what happens elsewhere. And they want to know what happens elsewhere, and they would like things to change here, because they don't like their job. They aren't motivated. They lack real motivation. What irritates me most is not always being understood by the person I'm speaking to, or feeling my hands tied by bureaucracy or ideology. That's very irritating. So when you ask them to work more without more money, well, it's not surprising they're not very enthusiastic. Agnes arrived a month and a half ago and started work at nurse level. So already there will be an improvement because we are working on two fronts. We are dealing with two things at the same time. Me on a medical level and she on the nurse level. So I believe there will be some changes in the work at the Phu Loc hospital. After that, we will be working at the second hospital in the mountains. The Nam Dong hospital is a tiny one, located in an isolated area where there are a lot of ethnic minorities. In general, they are very poor in Vietnam.
Agnes and Nadia go once or twice a week to the Nam Dong hospital. It takes 2 hours to reach by the dirt road. Along the way, they pass through the mountains, which to some extent are still barren because the vegetation hasn't grown anymore, ever since the Americans dropped their famous Agent Orange defoliant. Nearby the hospital live the Catus, one of the country's numerous ethnic groups. Here, the French doctors want to repaint the walls so as to confer a lighter and cleaner atmosphere in the place. A well, financed by the MSF organization, has already been finished. This allows the hospital to have clean water at any time, a true luxury. But to accomplish these acts, both a strong will and perseverance are essential, as well as a great desire to be and to stay here.
I believe that first of all there is the desire to leave. Yes, that's it, the desire to leave, to discover something different, and also the desire to do something you can't do at home. Something which might be the expression of solidarity towards deprived populations, of course. But you also expect some satisfaction, a different life, a quality of life which is generally much better than in Paris, at least for me. There's also meeting other people. When you're involved in a team, it's interesting to know why the other members have come away. Perhaps not for the same reason as you, but there's always something you can learn from it. And it might help you to find a reason you came away that you didn't know about at the time.
And once one is here, there's nothing else to do than to adapt oneself to this rather surprising hospital environment. In the labyrinth of the corridors, one can encounter either a chicken, a dog, or a family doing housework in the child delivery room. Further on, another family is cooking for a sick relative. Here there's no hygiene service, only that which serves the meals in the hospital. Here hardly anybody...
Member of staff, it is as if she hasn't realised the importance of observation. It also means that she doesn't care about him, and that is a typical example of the medical staff's lack of motivation in Vietnam. Of course, this is partly due to the fact that they won't earn any more money. So working more or less will in no way change the fact that their wage is insufficient. On the other hand, there is an enormous handicap. One shouldn't be different from others. Generally, one shouldn't stand out from the crowd. So one shouldn't work too well, and that is the ideal way to undermine a job and to discourage people from doing anything.
Finally, the baby was transferred to the better-equipped Huey Central Hospital. In any case, this incident of negligence will leave him with some after-effects for the rest of his life.
We would like to be 100% efficient, which would mean transforming everything. But in fact, things go very slowly, so we have to acknowledge every little change, which often doesn't appear after just a couple of months, but maybe 6 or even 9 months later. So it means that we've waited for it, that we've been upset sometimes, that some days we've said to ourselves, they really don't care, what am I doing here? I'm going to leave. It won't change anything for them. It also means that we've burst into tears, we've had fits of anger. So we have to be humble. You have to know what you want to do, what you would like to do, and just try to do it. But you must accept that you're not a magician. It has to pass through somebody else, and that person is the one who lives here. It's the native who doesn't share our mentality and who doesn't have the same goals. I meet the patients either during the outpatients consultations or when they are hospitalized. I don't talk to them a lot, and I rarely speak directly with them. Sometimes I examine them, but not very often. On their part, there's a curiosity, an expectation, a kind of hope, a hope that sometimes appears totally crazy. I remember one day, during a consultation, a father brought in his child who was not sick. His child was in very good health, and the Vietnamese doctor, after examining him, asked, "But why did you come?" The father answered, "Because she, that's to say me, is here, and I would like her to give me some medicine." I asked, why should I give him medicine if his son isn't ill? And he replied, "Yes, I know, but she should give it to me for the next time my child is sick, so I could give it to him." It's a little bit surprising. And sometimes I've seen children and adults who have had irreversible after-effects due to incurable diseases that I can't heal any more than the Vietnamese doctor. But even so, they come to see the foreign doctor, just in case he knows a miraculous cure. It's always very delicate to tell them that I'm no more a magician than the Vietnamese doctors. On the other hand, and I believe they feel this, there's perhaps a rigour in the treatment that the Vietnamese doctors don't always have, so consequently that gives them a different confidence in us.
But sometimes it's too late to act. This woman gave birth a month ago. According to tradition, she didn't eat any fruit or vegetables during her pregnancy. The Vietnamese doctors think that the baby is in need of vitamin K. This morning, he is suffering from an internal hemorrhage. His mother then decides to bring him to the Phu Loc hospital because she knows she will find the French doctors there. She wants to hope, to believe in a miracle, but it will be impossible to save her child.
Do I feel helpless? Of course I do. At certain moments we are a little bit helpless. We haven't all the equipment we need, or all the people we should have. But I believe that it's good to do what we are doing. It's good to do what we are doing in spite of everything. There are advantages to the non-government organisations. At any rate, one of them is their fundamental message, which says we are doing something humanitarian, we are doing something. We want to help people who need it, but we don't want to stay in an office. We want to stay in contact with the people constantly. We are not here to theorise, we are here to do something concrete. And that is perhaps the most important message, to forget the waffle. And even if it's always pleasant to hear that we are doing a humanitarian job, we have to get beyond those words and just get on with the job. I'm convinced that this is precisely the role of non-government organisations, and one should make sure it doesn't go off the rails.
And in order to be more concrete, a second mission has been opened in North Vietnam at the Ha Long Bay. The main purpose of this mission is to watch over the return of the Vietnamese refugees who are little by little coming back to their country ever since the government assured them of their safety.
There are many objectives. The first objective was to be present here in Vietnam, to be present in a country where there was nobody at the beginning. So this is an objective we have reached. The second objective concerns essentially the northern mission, but also ours to a certain extent. It is to be present when the Vietnamese refugees start to come back and to make certain that everything goes well. The third objective is to try to bring a little touch of, well, to try to revitalise the Vietnamese health system. Of course, it's very little because it's not the whole Vietnamese health system. It's only at a local level, which isn't so important. A district, for instance, the Phu Loc district, has 130,000 inhabitants. Compared to the 68 million people living in Vietnam, that isn't many. This is something that I really try to keep in mind. I'm not megalomaniac. I'm not here to change life in Vietnam. I'm not here to transform the health system. That would need much greater means. And above all, it would mean the Vietnamese themselves establishing their own program. But as long as there's nobody else here, I believe that our presence is useful. But the day will come when there will be a lot of other international organisations working in collaboration with the Vietnamese. And when it does, it will be time for us Doctors Without Frontiers to leave, because our job here would be over. That's my opinion. It's not necessarily shared by the HQ in Paris.
Then Nadia will start off again in another country, on another mission, because going back to work in France isn't yet part of her plans.
I think I've always loved travel. From the very first, I've always wanted to travel, and I've also always had a certain ideal, to live for exchanging, to live for giving. And as I progressed in my medical studies, that didn't change. It just became more and more obvious. That's because I didn't like the medical milieu in France. Of course, being a doctor in France is a vital job. But me, I have maybe something else to give to people. And in a way, that's why I left. Maybe one day I will stop practicing medicine because I want to do something else, because I would like to write, because I would like to just lounge around the house, look after children. Why not? But when I feel that time has come, I'll say it's now. But in the meantime, for the moment, I have something concrete to do. I have this concrete mission here in Vietnam. I'm going to continue it for another year.
For another year, because Nadia has decided to stay on longer. The coordinator has recently ended his 2-year mission and has just gone back definitively to France. Agnes the nurse will leave Hue within 5 months. Thus Nadia's team will change once more. But the Ha Long Bay Northern Mission will close next summer. Meantime, work doesn't stop. A few cholera cases have just appeared.